So I'm Ann Martinka, and I lived in Eden Prairie for 25 years with my husband, Bob. We have 3 children, 23-year-old who graduated this last year from Madison. We have a 20-year-old daughter with Down syndrome named Joy, who still lives with us, and a graduating senior, Aaron, who lives with us. So actually all 3 kids are with us.
Individuals with disabilities have long been a marginalized population. Because of the large spectrum of mental and physical diagnoses and the wide variety of abilities and skill levels, fitting in with society has never been an easy feat for these individuals. Individuals with disabilities make up 12.8% of the American population, yet are markedly misunderstood, underrepresented, and left behind. 28% of 25 to 64-year-olds with severe physical disabilities fall far below the federal poverty line, 4 times the rate for people of the same age who are not disabled. One of the biggest causes and consequences of this jarring statistic is because of housing. Housing costs are a burden for most impoverished people, but disability housing has had a long history of government regulation and change. For many years, it was common for people with disabilities to be put into mental institutions. It was believed that these institutions relieved their inhabitants of the stresses of everyday life, but they were meagerly funded by the states and had low standards of quality in living. This model began to change in the 1960s with the Kennedy administration. At this time, a turn towards the current model of group housing was made. I talked to Sue Walker, the Chief Program Officer for Hammer Residences, a private nonprofit that runs several group homes in Minnesota.
And now that means I'm in charge of all of our programs. That's 10 apartment programs, 36 group homes, so about 40 people in home.
Sue has worked for Hammer for over 35 years. She told me more about the state's transition to community-based housing.
At the time, people were told by the doctors to either put them in an institution or hide them in your home. And there was, again, legislation that said that people should not live in institutions. So Minnesota took that seriously, and they got rid of all of their state-run institutions. But we kind of went down the group home road.
To learn more about group homes and the housing process, I asked Anne about her own situation.
Being that Joy has Down syndrome, she cannot live on her own without support. She doesn't want to live with us for the rest of her life, and nor do we want her to. She is a young lady with her own ideas and her own desires, and she wants to move out on her own, and we support that. But she needs to live either in a group home or an apartment that's supported, or some way that we will have staff with her at all times. And we want her to live close.
They face confusing regulations with receiving waivers, linger on long waiting lists, and are sometimes forced to leave the communities they have grown up in. When you emailed me, you mentioned that you are kind of terrified to begin looking for that kind of housing with all of those factors going into it, and group housing for your own daughter in the near future. And why is that?
We've had Joy with us 24/7 for 20 years. So when I put her out into the real world without us there, it's going to be kind of scary, because then she's going to be in the hands of staff that we don't know at this point.
Mm-hmm. Not only is the housing process long and full of fear for many families, it is also very expensive.
The other thing is, she doesn't have any money, and so we have to rely on the waiver. Waiver pays for the housing, but they offset it with taking away the Social Security that they get. So the individual's left with like $90 to $95 a month for incidentals, and that's incredibly hard to live on.
Right.
Whether you go to a movie, whether you buy shoes, you just can't live on that. No. So, but the cost for a group home with staffing is incredibly high. So that's scary.
This is largely due to the fact that many of these individuals cannot work and must rely on the government for supplemental income. However, almost all of the small sums they receive go towards housing costs, and even then they are priced out of many housing markets or cannot afford to pay for group housing.
Because the other issue is employment. You can't support yourself in a job then because you don't have enough money to pay for your housing.
Those with Social Security benefits are not incentivized to work because the income they make takes away from the amount of Social Security money they receive, a total mostly used for housing, which is not enough to cover all of the expenses. When it comes to group homes, demand definitely outweighs supply. There aren't enough open spaces, and this deficit will continue to grow as new group homes stop being implemented. For one, it's incredibly expensive to start a group home.
Can't just start a house and pay for it because it's very expensive. So if the government doesn't have supports that are decided through the legislature about what kind of housing is going to be available, it's really hard for a company like Hammer or a family to just have enough money to open some kind of housing.
Sue also added that there aren't any other mechanisms for funding unless money is raised by a nonprofit like Hammer.
There's only a few around that are nonprofit, and they're usually full. But then you look at the ones that have a lot of openings, and you want to go, why is
do
that?
they have a lot of openings?
Yeah, there's a reason. They've stopped implementing new group homes just by sheer fact that they either can't afford them or people don't want them in their neighborhood, or they've
Like
got
Ann
enough,
said, there are
you know,
people who
they-
oppose
in
the
their-
presence of group homes in their community. NIMBY, or Not in My Backyard, is a title used to describe those who actively oppose new group homes being introduced into their communities.
There are people that stand behind that acronym when like a group home is going to be talked about. They get behind that and then rally the neighborhood to attend the meetings just to get that press, the negative part, and then, you know, there's so much that they can't get through or whatever because there's too much pressure from the surrounding areas, all because they don't want them in their backyard.
This may be for a variety of reasons, including fear of safety or drops in property values. Anne shared with me an example of an Eden Prairie housing initiative that was shut down by NIMBYers.
There's a complex of some sort going up that they're by the old Duns Brothers over there. A huge amount of that was going to be affordable housing, which then was going to bring in those with disability. They had a huge fight with the neighbors around them.
The opposing stances on Social Security income, funding levels, and housing options are personal and unique. From Anne's perspective, this opposition seems unreasonable.
You know, fear of somebody different than you. I mean, that's a world we live in, you know. Isn't that a fear basis right there? Like, I don't know. I don't want to see... You know, I know so many people with disabilities that are so wonderful and kind and caring and,
Yeah.
you know, you just want to go,
I guess that's why it's... But there are other reasons people either advocate for or against increased funding.
I mean, Minnesota's one of the highest tax states, and I'm sure there are some people that get really upset because it's not personal to them either. Those with disabilities are one small piece of that housing issue. Because that housing issue is huge.
Oh, right.
Huge with poverty, huge. And the disability piece is just, so we fight for our piece of that, and then you've got everyone else fighting for their piece of that.
Sue described to me the argument over the need for increased funding and why taxpayers and legislation is reluctant to extend more assistance.
Well, the biggest part of the Health and Human Services budget is funding for people with disabilities and the other population. It's gigantic, and that is true federally and in the state government, and that's very true in Minnesota. So when we're talking about legislation, there's always talk about needing more, but also cuts. So every single legislative session, we are lobbying for more funding to provide programs and support for people with disabilities. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who say, why can't people try harder to do it on their own? If you live in the suburbs, you're going to say, this is the lifestyle that I think people should have. If you live in the inner city, or maybe you haven't had as many advantages, whether that's educationally or job-wise, you might say, this is a good enough lifestyle. Why do people need X, Y, and Z?
So what's currently being advocated for from the disability community?
We still have people in the disability community who aren't being served well enough through the government funding. Then we're always advocating that we need more money, more people, more support to provide people with opportunities for housing, opportunities for employment, opportunities for the support that they need to live a safe and healthy life. Let's say someone's needs change and they need more medical support, or they need more medical equipment, or they're having a mental health issue. If they say no, then that person gets less support for their needs. So that's what we're always advocating for.
The advocates out there are working really hard to say, hey, you know, these people deserve to live in the best way possible,
Right.
And work, you know, as best as they can and contribute. So you shouldn't be penalized for doing so.
Right.
That's what is frustrating.
So what's the other side of the argument from the legislative point of view?
The lack of incentive for the legislature to give more money to health and human services is always a question of why you need more money. Isn't what you're getting enough? And I think that's a fair question. I mean, if you just keep dumping money into a particular program, no matter what it is, and there isn't some oversight about how effective you're being with your programs, what supports do we have in place in our system to evaluate if the money is being used responsibly? And I think that's a fair question. So that's the argument. Are we using the funding responsibly?
So, the housing crisis persists and threatens impoverished individuals with disabilities with homelessness and dependency. Anne shared an interesting insight to the future of this issue.
But one of the things that's happening too is people with disabilities are living longer because of better health care. And so people aren't leaving their group homes. And so now you've got people up and coming, even without really a lot of places to go.
So it's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good problem to have because
Right.
they're living longer.
Right.
But like I don't want Joy has to go to New Branch, Minnesota to live because that's where their opening is, because then she's out of her community, she doesn't have family that's going to go visit.
For almost all individuals with disabilities, living independently, working, having the freedom of choice, and being an active part of the community are values of the utmost importance. When they face housing shortages, high prices, and other costs for medical and personal care, there is no surprise why poverty rates are much higher for those with disabilities.
I remember Levi and Aaron were downtown Minneapolis. They passed some homeless people, and there was a young man with Down syndrome that was homeless, which threw them for a loop because they can't even imagine, you know, someone Joy not having somewhere to live.
So I asked Anne and Sue what they think needs to happen to address the housing crisis.
What I think has to happen is that everyone has to start thinking outside the box.
I don't think there's enough creativity and government funding to really help people get on their feet.
Because a lot of disability care requires human beings and trained staff, a lot of expenses go towards paying caregivers. Especially with the growing population, if there is not enough funding, this threatens the ability to provide adequate care. Sue explained how some programs have begun to address this problem.
Technology more. Think about how we can use technology to support people, so whether that's medication administration or medication monitoring, or using something as simple as FaceTime to talk with the person about, did you get certain chores done?
It just takes a lot of work,
Yeah.
you know, and you have to have a lot of energy, and you kind of have to have some money behind you. I think until the legislatures, until they have a personal interest or a personal story, I don't think it affects them, and so it's not as important.
Any other thoughts or questions for me or
I
anything?
wish you had answers. I wish once you did this, then you go, oh, I got the perfect answer.
I solved it. Now I can move on to the next thing. Oh, I wish.